Hey everybody, Barney here. Before we get into today's video, I just want to let you know this was supposed to originally be a how to regulate your temps on the Weber Smokey Mountain tutorial. And it turned into this, can you stop a runaway temp on your Weber Smokey Mountain? So I ran with it. Hopefully you guys find it interesting. There's a lot of useful information. Let's get on with the video. Pitter patter. Let's get at her. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Life of Barney. And today I'm going to be talking about temp control on the Weber Smokey Mountain. And if you find yourself constantly chasing temperatures or trying to dial it into some exact number, this video is for you. In today's episode, I'm going to cover everything from the moment you assemble your Weber Smokey Mountain all the way to dialing it in to your preferred temperature. All right, I'm just waiting for my Weber Smokey Mountain to get the charcoal lit. I've already got my fire starter in there. I'm starting with a full basket because I want to simulate what it would be like setting it up for an actual long smoke session. And I will also be having both grills and the water pan in the middle section of the Weber Smokey Mountain. I'm not filling the water pan with anything. I'm purely using it as heat deflection to give a bit of an accurate representation of using a non-direct heat smoking method in order to give you probably a good day-to-day idea of what it's like to control the temperature on the Weber Smokey Mountain. You guys stay tuned, I'll be right back. I've had my Weber Smokey Mountain heating up now for about 10 minutes after putting the fire starter in. Let's have a look. I think it's getting just about time to assemble everything and put it together. Let's get in here and I'll just show you what the charcoal kind of looks like in my situation. So a little bit difficult because there's still some black on the charcoal on the top, and the camera never quite does it justice when I try to do this, but underneath there's a lot of red hot coals, but just in the middle, which is where I put my fire starter. You can usually tell with your hand, if you get maybe 2 inches away from the top of the charcoal and that's too hot to hold your hand, that's you're in the territory that it's time to assemble your Weber Smokey Mountain, particularly if you are aiming for that usual 250 Fahrenheit mark, right? Now, when you're working with the Weber Smokey Mountain, one of the most crucial things to remember in temperature control is when you start it and you get that charcoal going, did you start with enough lit charcoal to pull in enough oxygen to keep the charcoal burning at a good rate and even be able to get up to that 250 temperature in the first place? As well as, did you let too much of it get lit in the very beginning? So I've been running the stopwatch, and I'm going to do that for every segment of this episode. We're 10 minutes in. It's time to assemble. Nice and easy. There we go. I think we're on a little slope here, but I don't think there's a level piece of my backyard anywhere. Now that it's put together, I want you guys to come here because I want to show you what I do with my vents as soon as I assemble the Weber Smokey Mountain. And before we get into that, there's something I want to say. When you're dealing with a passive smoking system like the Weber Smokey Mountain, there's no electronic dial, there's no true temperature control. It's just airflow control with the vents. Whenever I say a temperature like 250 or 275 or 300, I really mean a range. 225 to 275 is my goal when I'm aiming for 250. If I said I want 300 degrees, I'm fine with 275, I'm fine with 325, and anything in between. Because there's no exact precision control on a Weber Smokey Mountain or any other passive smoking device like this. Come on in here. Let me show you what I do with the vents when I get it assembled for smoking. Because everything on the Weber Smokey Mountain regarding temperature control is related to airflow, sorry about the shaky camera, but it's related to airflow, which means to control the temperature is to control the airflow. Less oxygen flowing over the coals means less combustion. Less combustion means lower temperature. So now that it's assembled, I like to turn mine down or close them until they're about the size of a pencil. About that. Okay, pretty close. It's not exact, as I said. We're going to do that to all 3 of them. That's 1. There's 2. There's 3. The top vent I leave in the open position almost, we'll say 99% of the time. My top vent is open 100%. And now we set the stopwatch, and I want to see, with the bottom vents about 1/3 or so open and the top vent 100% open, and what I think is probably the right amount of charcoal lit before assembling, how long does it take to stabilize around 250 degrees? This will give you guys a good idea of what it might be like when you're doing this with your Weber Smokey Mountain. So while we wait, there's a few things I want to add. Number 1, thanks for tuning in. It's Life of Barney here. I'm Barney. This is a show about barbecue, dad life, and backyard life. Fun projects, yummy food, and just great pro beginner content. I'm not some competition barbecue or pro handyman or anything. It's just real life as it happens. So thanks for coming. Hit subscribe while you're here. Next, everybody has their own philosophy about vent settings on the Weber Smokey Mountain. There are guys that do the complete opposite as to what I do. They leave the bottom vents open 100% and they use the top vent to control airflow. I don't like that method. I don't subscribe to that method, but everybody has their own way of doing it. So what I'm showing you today is just my way. But in the world of barbecue and smoking, there's 2 things. 1, there's always another way, and 2, there's always somebody with an opinion that doesn't like what you're doing. And you know what we say about people with opinions on this channel. Last but not least, before I just take a quick break and wait for the temp to stabilize, I am using lump charcoal today. Royal Oak is the brand. I get mine at my local Home Hardware, which we have here in Canada, and it's $24.99, which is anywhere from $5 to $8 cheaper than Crappy Tire and Rona and or Lowe's and all them. So anyway, I'm yammering on. Let's go see how the temperature is doing. This is a 5-minute check-in since assembling my Weber Smokey Mountain. Just under 300. Let's wait another 5 minutes and see where it goes. Welcome back. We are at the 10-minute mark. After putting it all together, bottom vent set to about 1/3 open using lump charcoal. Let's see where we're at. Just over 300 degrees. Nice amount of heat coming out. And in fact, you know what? That's not just over. That's quite a bit over. We're almost at 325. So if I was smoking something and my goal was 250, I would not accept this high of a temperature. As I mentioned before, when we're dealing with a passive smoker like the Weber Smokey Mountain, we're looking for a range and not an exact number. So if I want 250, I'd be fine with just below 250 or just above 250. Now let me show you how we remedy an issue like this. Come on down, join me at the vents. What I'm going to do is I will set each vent about half of what it already was. I've reset the stopwatch. We're going to see how long it takes for the temperature to start coming down. All right, we're using lump charcoal. As I said, lump usually burns a little bit faster than briquettes. It also burns a little bit more unpredictably than briquettes. I'll watch the temperature for about 5 or 10 minutes. We'll see if it starts to come down. If it doesn't start to come down, then we can pull the emergency brake. This is where I start using the top vent to, I don't like the term to snuff out the coals, because that's not really what's happening, but you are greatly restricting the airflow when you close the top vent, when the bottom vents are already only 1/6 open. If this is happening to you when you get your Weber Smokey Mountain or your charcoal barbecue or smoker going in general, it's usually because when you put it all together, you had too much charcoal lit right at the beginning. So all of that energy that was coming off the charcoal needs to be suppressed and slowed down. The combustion has to slow down, and the only way we can do that on these types of smokers is to restrict the amount of oxygen that comes in. It's better to take a little bit of extra time at the beginning and play with your vents. And by play with the vents, just do what I've done. Shut them down a little bit more and be patient. Spend that extra 10 to 15 minutes up front now correcting vent position and let it stabilize where you want it, as opposed to just slapping your meat on, rushing and fiddling around with the vents and all this stuff as time goes on. You just drive yourself mad. Stay tuned, guys. I'll be right back in about 5 or 10 minutes. Welcome back. I've let about 20 minutes go by. I figure there's no sense in rushing certain parts of this video because for you guys watching at home, each clip is instantaneous. You don't have to wait that 20 minutes. So I wanted to let it go for another 20 minutes to see what would truly happen. As I said, lump charcoal burns a little hotter. So your margin for error when you're getting your initial amount of charcoal lit is very small. Too much, and it's just too much heat coming up to the top, forcing too much oxygen to keep being sucked in the vents in the bottom. Let's have a look at what the temperature is, and you can see the issue at hand. So we're about 21, 22 minutes past when I closed the vents down to 1/6, and we are now on the lid thermometer 275. I have attached my probes so we can see what the real temperature is on the top and lower grates. Let's have a look. The top is 341, the bottom is 348, 349. It just changed there. This means I have only one choice to make at this point, now that we've been running probably around 40 minutes waiting for the temperature to stabilize down at 250 where I want it. And that is to close the bottom vents completely. And I will probably close the top lid or the top vent maybe about 50%. Now, some people might be watching this and think, geez, man, why didn't you just quit and start it all over again with a fresh batch of charcoal? But why would I do that? That's not real life. That's not how barbecue actually happens. Even guys with offset smokers that actually burn, you know, post oak or maple or cherry wood, actual logs of wood, those guys have to start with a bed of coals and put some logs in, and sometimes that fire gets roaring hot, much hotter than they need. It's no different on a Weber Smokey Mountain. There are no digital controls, no temp control, no fuel management system, none of that. This is real life. And it's best you learn that the mistakes can happen, such as having too much lit charcoal or too much heat when you assemble it, because it's that much harder to get the temperature to just calm down, the combustion to chill out and slow down. So we move to the final step, which is closing the bottom vents and close the top vent about 50%. This is going to dramatically slow the airflow over the coals. And when we slow the airflow over the coals by shutting the vents at the bottom and then restricting how much hot air can come out of the top, therefore helping alleviate the low pressure that happens at the bottom vents, in other words, how it sucks in more air at the bottom, this will slow the combustion down quite dramatically. I like to use this as an emergency brake because when you snuff out, as I mentioned earlier, the charcoal, you can accidentally slow the combustion too much, and then you have too hard of a time bringing it back up. So we're only going to do this until we start to see the temperature come back down. And as the temp comes down, we will slowly reopen the top vent. And when we get closer to that 250 range, we will slowly open the bottom vents ever so slightly. 45 minutes. We're back down to 325 on the dome thermometer. I am almost fully shut on the top vent. And just as I said, the top vent in my philosophy is more like an emergency brake, and it was clear that the temperature was running away on me, which is one thing that I don't quite like about using lump charcoal, is because of how hot it burns. It is a lot hotter and aggressive of a burn than briquettes, but the temperatures come down to 325, which means I'm getting close to the range I want to be in, that 225 to 275 range. When it comes down to about 300 degrees, I will slowly, every 5 minutes or so, just start opening the top vent ever so slightly. And as we get closer to that 250 degree mark, I'll start opening the bottom vents a little bit, but only a little bit. Here's some of the reasons why this happens with lump charcoal. Now, first and foremost, it was too hot when I put it together. Lump charcoal doesn't take very long to get up to smoking temp. In other words, when it's appropriate to close up your Weber Smokey Mountain, put it all together and set your vents. Doesn't take long. Briquettes, on the other hand, do take a little while to get into that sweet spot where you can close everything up and then just set your vents and walk away. What could have helped, what I could do differently that might have made this a little more smoother to start off with the right temperature, is to use a charcoal chimney. I can't stand using a charcoal chimney. I just don't like them. I should really find out if maybe they make small charcoal chimneys. I have a fairly large one. And if I were to fill it up maybe halfway and get that charcoal lit and then dump it right in the middle, that probably would have been fine. I would have been close to 250, I think. I would much rather assemble the smoker and not be hot enough and leave it for 20 minutes to come up to temperature than to start way too hot and have to wait for it to come down in temperature, because now I'm just burning charcoal, wasting away. I could, if I was smoking something today, I'm not. I'm just burning charcoal for the sake of teaching you guys something. But if I was cooking something today, based on how much time I have available to me, I may have just put whatever the meat was on the Weber Smokey Mountain and closed up the vents and let that temperature come down, just so I didn't lose valuable cooking time. But I'm just trying to teach people some valuable pro beginner stuff here. So that's the big lesson of today in this one in temperature management, is if you start with too much lit charcoal, you're gonna have to wait quite a while. We're now probably 50 minutes now with it coming down in temperature. Yeah, we're just below 325. And let's take a moment to look at our digital thermometer. We're at, what is this? 301. That is probe 1. That's the top grill, and we are 298 on the bottom grill. Okay, so it's quite a bit different than what the lid thermometer is showing, but we are dropping at a nice rate now, and I would suspect it won't be much longer, and we'll probably be back down to around that 250. Here's some other tips as you're working around managing your temperature on the Weber Smokey Mountain. For your long smokes, and specifically when you're using lump charcoal, you are going to have to open your vents more the further into the cook you go. Because the more charcoal you use up, the less there is that's combusting. In other words, if a whole grouping of charcoal in the charcoal grate is lit, there's a lot of charcoal emitting heat. But as you burn through the charcoal, there's less and less emitting heat, which means your temperature starts to drop, which means you need to open the vents to push more oxygen over those coals to increase the amount of combustion and therefore elevate the amount of energy that's coming out, okay? It's all about the energy that comes off the charcoal. And the more you burn, the less you're left with. The less you're left with, the less energy that can come out, unless you increase combustion, like turning up the temperature basically. But you also get to the point where you may run out of charcoal. So keep an eye, probably around usually like the 3 to 4 hour mark when you're doing your long smokes on a Weber Smokey Mountain, the 18-inch anyway, you will notice that the temperature may start to drop. It's always a good idea, quickly open up that front door on the Weber Smokey Mountain, that guy, and just check how much charcoal is still in there and what's lit. I don't always stoke the coals unless the food's wrapped. If the food's wrapped, I stoke the coals. Otherwise, you just get a whole bunch of ash that kicks up, gets all over your food, and it's not the nicest. Time to check in. Hopefully some good news. We are at a whopping 1 hour and 45 minutes. We're back down almost 275 on the dome thermometer. Top grate is 278. Bottom grate is 272. Interesting how the temperatures have switched, which one's high and which one's low on the way back down. Now that we're getting close to that 250 range, which I'd be comfortable with about 225 to 275, now it's time to open up the vent on the top just a little. Okay, probably about, I'd say maybe halfway, because there's a lag when you make adjustments on your vents. So if I left it closed, this would start dropping faster and faster as time went. So to give you an idea of why it is so important to be careful how much charcoal gets lit at the very beginning, in other words, starting with too much heat, it took to go from 375, 380 Fahrenheit down to about 325, took about an hour and a half. To go from 325 to 275, it only took about 15 minutes, right? So you can see how quickly that temperature has now dropped. If I kept this closed, we would plummet. The charcoal would likely go out, and then you do truly have to start over, which for the purpose of the video, I'm trying to avoid. I'm trying to show you how long it takes to make temperature adjustments, especially in the circumstances of having too much charcoal lit in the beginning. Now, it's not as dramatic if you don't have enough charcoal lit in the beginning. In other words, it's not hot enough, because then you can always take your Weber Smokey Mountain apart and let a lot of oxygen over those coals with it all taken apart for another 10 minutes or so, and then put it all back together. So it's very easy to rectify that, but when you start with too much charcoal lit, you're in for a little bit of trouble. Now, in my case, if I was smoking something and I was on a really hard time limit, I would either just bite the bullet and throw the meat on there and hope for the best as the temperature came down, or I would dump the charcoal in my fire pit, have a little backyard fire with that, throw some wood on it, and then just start the process over with a fresh batch of charcoal. But that's not what I'm doing today. I'm just giving you guys a little educational video on modifying temperatures, temperature control, runaway temps, that kind of thing. So I've opened the top lid about halfway. I think in about 5 minutes, I'm going to open the bottom vents back up only about 1/6, so about half your typical amount. I'll check in with you in just a few minutes. As we check, about 5 to 10 minutes later, look at that. The temperature actually went up. It climbed quite quickly as soon as I had opened in that previous scene. I opened the top vent about halfway, came back a couple minutes later, opened the vents on the bottom. I say 1/6. I opened them a tiny crack, and the temperature shot right up. We were all the way down to 275 and dropping, and it came right back up to 300. I've since closed the top vent again. So come here, let's talk about something. If this video serves as nothing else, let it be a lesson that you need to be very careful when you start your Weber Smokey Mountain or similar passive style smokers, to not start with too much heat, right? Too much heat is extremely hard to control and bring the temperature down effectively. Now, some may say, why didn't I just shut all the vents down right at the beginning? Because that's also not a proper way to control the temperature on a smoker like this. When you control the temperature on a smoker like this, because there's always that little bit of lag, if you quickly shut everything down too soon, you end up chasing temperatures, because there wasn't a whole lot of charcoal lit at the beginning. It's just the pieces of lump that were lit were too hot. But if I shut everything down, there wasn't enough lit charcoal to, we'll say, smoothly bring the temperature down. It probably would have plummeted too quickly, and then I would have been into a whole relighting process. Now, where that actually matters is when you're halfway through a smoke and you notice the temperature's either coming up because maybe it's a windy day and wind is getting pushed into your smoker, or maybe you're running low on charcoal and the temperature starts to drop a little, you can't just open up all the vents and say, oh no, the temperature's dropping, I'll just open up all the vents and hope for the best. No, because then you'll skyrocket past the temperature you need. Small incremental adjustments, and wait that 10 to 15 minutes or so before making any other changes when you're working on smokers like the Weber Smokey Mountain. Because now I'm curious. How much charcoal did we go through in this 2.5 hour endeavor? Not even that much. Look at that. Hardly any at all. Hardly any at all. That's wild. Well, this was a fun experiment. Even I learned quite a bit. Sometimes you can close down the vents and the temperature will come down pretty quickly if you catch it soon enough. But as I said, guys, you get enough hot charcoal when you put it together, you could almost argue it's a lost cause. I hope you all learned something today. I'm glad you joined me. And if you made it this far, you may as well subscribe. I do a lot of pro beginner content, barbecue stuff, lessons learned, and the odd backyard project now and again, or house project now and again. I'm glad you stuck around. Hit that like button, guys. It makes a difference. It really does. And tell me the last time your smoker had a runaway temp, and were you able to salvage it in time and save the meal? I'll see you guys in the next one. And don't tell my parents I was smoking in the backyard. I'll see you next time. Look at this pumpkin that came out of our garden. It broke off the vine a little while ago, which is too bad, but it seems to be ripening just fine on its own. That's kind of neat. Thanks for sharing that with me.
And I also found some other ones in the garden too.
Yeah, but they're probably still attached, so don't try and bring those to me, okay? All right, I'm gonna get back to my filming, all right? All right. Make sure you tell me what else you find in the garden, okay? All right.
And we also found some tomatoes and cucumbers.
Good. Wonderful. Thanks. So I'm using Royal Oak today. Royal Oak, it's a great lump charcoal all the way until dialing it in, all the way until dialing, wow, that's hard to say.